Hello and welcome to another edition of My Dinner with Gabe. I'm Gabe Van Handel.
And I'm Zav Plate.
This is a film review show that we do for you. Box office of July 13th through the 15th. Ice Age opened up to number 1. Ice Age 4, Continental Drift, $46 million with a per theater average of $12,000, the highest this week. Second was The Amazing Spider-Man. In its second week, it pulled in $34 million, bringing its total up to $200. Ted was third with $22 million. Brave was fourth with $11 million. Savages was fifth with $9 million in its second week. Magic Mike was sixth with $9 million in its third week. Strong run for that film. Tyler Perry's Medea's Witness Protection was seventh with $5.5 million. Katy Perry, The Part of Me, was eighth with $3.8. Moonrise Kingdom stayed at 9 with $3.7 million. Madagascar 3 was 10th with $3.6. Now, it's been a pretty profitable couple of weeks at the box office for pretty much everything. Everything's been doing either adequately or on par or good or pretty good business. Nothing is bombing right now. Nothing is just tanking or just sitting there in the top 10. Woody Allen's To Rome with Love is even kind of gaining some sleeper hitdom. It's no Midnight in Paris, but it's definitely gaining momentum. The Avengers is still just moving along. Snow White and the Huntsman dropped a little bit faster than they thought it was going to, but overseas it's pulling in a lot of business. Prometheus dropped a lot faster than they were expecting to, and Men in Black 3 straight up just kind of fell off a lot faster than they were anticipating. But all these films, because of their overseas takes, are no danger of losing money. So, Ice Age 4, Continental Drift. I'm sorry, I can't keep these replaceable, forgettable Ice Age movies in order. So, there's still life in this critically drifting series. The first two were critical darlings, were pretty well received, and are personally just not bad. In my personal opinion, they're just not that bad. They're not that bad. They're not all consumed by crotch jokes. They could be a lot worse, but they're not amazing either. They're not fabulous. So for the fourth entry, a lot of people were predicting that this was going to be kind of a sluggish entry. But it wasn't. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. On par with the first Ice Age, which it could have been worse than, but it's definitely not as good as Ice Age 2 The Meltdown, which pulled in $68 million. This film opening up to only $46. We'll see how its long run does. A lot of animated films have opened this year to pretty strong outings. Lorax with 70.2. That movie was very profitable. Brave for 66. Madagascar 3 with 60. A strong run in that strong series. So we'll see where this one goes. Spidey had a strong second week. Good word of mouth. And still the second weakest weekend of any of the Spider-Man movies so far. This movie is doing the least business by far of all the Spider-Man movies overall. It's the least talked about. It's just I'm just wondering why this was even made in some reason, in some ways. It was supposed to be a huge revamp, and unless you're going to go all or nothing, unless you're absolutely wanting to just crush and destroy all in your path, like the Batman franchise has been, like the revamp with that series, why even bother? Columbia has enough weight under its belt. They didn't need to do this, so I think people are just that desperate for remakes and for rehashing already safe or proven material, and it's proving to be less safe is what's happening. Ted is doing better business so far than the original smash hit The Hangover in the same amount of time. This is kind of a surprise. They knew this movie was going to do good business, that this movie was going to be profitable, but they were not expecting it to be a bona fide hit. It's a summer hit, summer raunchy comedy hit. There's usually one or two every summer, and this one is definitely the big one this year. Brave is not being phased in the least by Ice Age's entry into the Family Film Forum. Soon to be Pixar's 10th film to pass $200 million. So, not that any of that matters, but that was your box office news, your money news, your money movie news. One last note, I'm sorry. Magic Mike is a bona fide sleeper hit. So there. Let's talk about movie news in general. Peter Morgan, the guy who wrote The Queen and Frost Nixon, very highly accoladed, very well regarded screenwriter, is negotiating with Warner Brothers to write a biopic on Hugh Hefner. It's probably going to be a go next year, and I'm sure they'll have some intelligent, thoughtful director directing it. We'll see where that goes in development. It could be very good, actually. He's a very good screenwriter, and usually attached to very good projects. Finding Nemo 2 is in the works, with Andrew Stanton at the helm. Fresh off his ultimate disaster, highly publicized disaster, wrongly accused disaster, John Carter, which got so much publicity about the money attached to it and its bomb status that people forgot to stop and talk about whether it was a good movie or an inventive movie or not. Not a great film, but from what I've heard, actually a pretty good film. Yeah. Opening yesterday now, and July 20th, The Dark Knight Rises, which we saw. Zaf and I saw this movie.
Just now.
We just saw it, and we will be reviewing this soon. So I'm not even going to speculate on it a whole lot. I'm not going to give you my usual summary and my usual breakdown of critical consensus. We'll get to that soon. The Queen of Versailles also came out. This is a highly anticipated documentary about two upper echelon, rich, super rich people who want to build their own version, their own construction of recreation of the Palace of Versailles. They want to create the biggest commercial house in the country, the continental United States. This is before the housing bubble, and their fortune comes from real estate and timeshare and from housing. And once the bubble pops, their fortune is kind of up in the air for a little bit. So it's a documentary about the times we live in, the economic times we live in, and also how the rich were affected by this, which isn't something you hear as much about. You hear oftentimes about how people lost what little money they had, or so it's a different take on it. And it's also an engrossing study in this money porn phenomenon that's come out with, like, the Real Housewives of Orange County, the Real Housewives of Atlanta, just these trashy shows, which are, I'm sorry if you've ever watched them and if you've repeatedly watched them, they're engaging and they suck you in. And there's an allure about what we don't have, or the allure of how did people that don't deserve this have this, and why are we watching this? There's sort of this self-destructiveness associated with some of these shows, but you can't stop. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just a fact. Some of this stuff just is like beating your head in the wall, but yet you keep tuning in. There's something there. And watching people like this.
I don't know if I keep tuning in.
Well, you don't keep tuning in because you don't watch television. And
even if I did watch television, I still don't know if I would.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't watch these shows, but I understand why people do. I don't consider them any less intelligent. I wouldn't consider someone a TV drone just because they watch reality TV. Some of this stuff is so insanely mindless. It almost is like it's like going to a lecture on sort of advanced modern social networking or something, or some sort of business class, or some sort of social economic class, or watching just how people are sort of engineering themselves, or how people are believing themselves to think these days in terms of trashier and trashier, and with more and more impulse and more appearance and vanity and more illusions. I find this stuff just really mindless, but at the same time, there's a lot that can be discussed while watching stuff like this. And it's really funny sometimes, just at the utter catastrophe of what you're watching. Sometimes it's really, and because it's so well produced. Anyway, wow, that's a rant. That is a bona fide rant. I am sorry.
No, that's what we're here to do.
That's what we're here to do, exactly. So that's your movie news for this week. So Zav and I were planning a show, which we are now changing. And this is the show that you're getting. So we're not going to tell you about what we were planning because we're leaving that in the background for you. Maybe next week, maybe the week after. So you're just going to have to sit and wonder.
Right.
We're going to review 3 films altogether. The Dark Knight we saw in the theater together tonight.
Right.
I saw the documentary Marley about the reggae superstar Bob Marley, which I will be reviewing.
Right.
And we both also separately watched The Secret World of Arrietty, which is the recent DVD release by Disney DVD of the studio Ghibli. Ghibli? I think it's Ghibli. Which is the studio behind very intelligent Japanese animation fare such as Spirited Away and other Miyazaki classics. Miyazaki is the guy behind, the filmmaker and genius behind My Neighbor Totoro, Castle in the Sky, Pig Face, and other such un-Disney-like fare that's just really enchanting and much more mature and much more haunting and scary and fable-like and unsettling. And there's just this air of an older sort of wisdom behind it rather than having to cater to children, even if they are children's stories. There's just a lot more maturity and a lot more respect for the viewer that's thrown into it and a lot more directness. And they're shot much more like standard feature films. There's also a very hand-drawn quality, which I really love about these films, that there's a very, there's a limitation to it, but at the same time, I think you gain something. So we'll be talking about that movie, which got very good reviews this year, and which I was a little skeptical to watch, because sometimes those movies can be a little draining. But I think we both felt that way, but we both got a lot out of it. So with that being said, let's talk about The Dark Knight.
Oh, you want to talk about The Dark Knight first and not save it for last? Like
I suppose we'll save it for last. Okay, I'll go off on Marley.
Yeah, I think so. And you know what? I can start with a clip from it if you'd like. I actually have a clip lined up, and
why don't you?
Okay.
Here you go.
We'll just see how it goes. I'm gonna try and run this.
He put him out of Jamaica after the shooting. Yeah, man. Didn't say a word the whole way through.
We went to Nassau first, and then he went on to London.
Don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Singing, don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright.
Well, this part is just music.
I think he just wanted to take a break. He wanted to not be looking over his shoulder. He wanted not to be dealing with the problem, not dealing with the controversy. He just wanted some free headspace to
That's
work, to make
Break
music,
Spear,
to
who was a
tour.
girlfriend of his,
Singing sweet songs.
was an interviewee in the film.
We moved immediately into Chelsea area, Oakley Street. It was a great experience because we're all together in this house.
Well, on each floor there was a different musician. There was Tyrone Downey on one floor, Carlton Barrett on another floor, Family Man Barrett on another floor, Alvin Seacole Patterson on another floor. Neville Garrick, I think, was in the basement sharing with somebody.
We're a stone throw from Battersea Park Bridge. Once we went over the bridge, then you had the football field. Because we even played against some National Front guys. We whooped them a couple times over there.
Did he feel like he was in
That was a clip from Marley. I watched this film with unsure expectations of what I was going to get. I've been very not skeptical of Bob Marley, but I have very split opinions on Marley and Rastafarian and culture. And a lot of it, I realized after watching this movie, is just biased on some of my own prejudice, I think, and not racial prejudice, but just my own beliefs and sort of my own hindrances as a person and my own belief system and my lack of enlightenment about Bob Marley and his effect on the world and culture and politics, religion, and even, I'll say it, spirituality. I was very I thought I knew a lot about Bob Marley, and I knew a lot less than I thought I did. I thought I knew a lot about reggae culture, and I knew a lot less than I found out I did with this film. There's an incredible air of fluency and symmetry, and there's gorgeous scenery that's laced throughout this documentary, but they don't go to it constantly. They only use it really, really quizzically when it's appropriate. There's a great use of camera movement when it's appropriate. Excellent use of photographs, living photographs that they incorporate with footage, with archival footage, and they blend that with new documentary footage to really create the air of movement and of life and of sort of this 3D idea of Bob Marley. Even within still photographs, they just photograph it with such air and dynamite that Bob really came to life for me as more than a character, more than a subject in this movie. He was really a living, breathing person. And as someone who's a little skeptical of Bob Marley as being the pinnacle of white perceived reggae culture, because there's so much culture beyond Bob Marley in Jamaica, Jamaican music and reggae, that I always find him just to be sort of like the Martin Luther King, like the figurehead, the popular one, and not someone who necessarily did all the work and deserves all the credit that he gets. But important nonetheless. And Bob really comes across as a flawed individual in this movie, which I was really glad that that's how they presented him, because he was a narcissistic, very egotistical warrior. But what they presented was an honest portrait of him, an even-sided portrait. But they showed how people were hurt by him, but also how they accepted him in the name of what he did that was good. How 7 out of 10 things he did were really good, but yes, 3 out of 10 were questionable, very questionable. Bob's philosophy and ideas is one of adherent of strong Rastafarianism, and you could almost say that he's the one who pushed this notion into the mainstream culture in the West and even in Jamaican culture. One thing I learned was that he actually helped heal the nation briefly. Jamaica has the highest murder rate in the world, but there was a period where he healed and actually stopped the violence between two rival political movements, which were through gang violence, were eating each other alive, which were destroying the country. And with the help of Bob, he created a Peace Jamaica movement, and it nearly cost him his life and in several different times and cases. But in one case in particular, he was actually shot, and two other people were shot in his presence. There's these moments in history and there's these moments in music which are just brought out culturally very well in the movie, vivid, and there's a lot of even-headedness to how the subjects are photographed and viewed, and how they explain their different perspectives.
Do you know much about the filmmakers themselves?
Kevin J. McDonald made it, and he is not a documentary filmmaker, so I was a little bit surprised at the fact that he was at the helm here. He's a British filmmaker. I was going to bring up his filmography here in 1 second. I believe he's associated with some unexpected works. Look him up as director. So, the music that I love.
But ultimately, is this a film?
This is a great film. This is a great documentary. This is a wonderful, vivid, alive documentary. And if you already like Bob Marley, if you love Bob Marley, if you are enthralled by Bob Marley, this is a must-see. It's an exhausting film. It's 2.5 hours that really thoroughly dives into the man, his myth, and his music. I enjoyed every minute of this movie. Extremely highly recommended.
And do you know why it was made so long after Bob Marley's death? Is it, how did they...
Well, there's a lot of documentaries that have been made about Bob Marley, but this is just a newer one with a lot more money behind it and a lot more presence and people who know what they're talking about with Bob Marley, who are very close to him. Ziggy Marley speaks out. One of his daughters speaks out. Bunny Wailer speaks out, who is one of the most intelligent people in the movie, and that's saying a lot. But he has a very unique perspective about Bob. If Peter Tosh were alive, I'm sure he would have been in it. But it's not to say that there hasn't been a movie made about Bob Marley since he died or since he was alive. It's just I would say this is the culmination and the definitive film. Can you find Kevin Jimmy Down?
Well, I'm having trouble finding it right off the bat, but I don't know why, I'm kind of getting sent down weird paths with this computer.
IMDb.
No, I did exactly what I should have done, and it didn't work.
Okay.
So anyway, generally speaking, though, you think it's a good film, and it brings something new to
It creates something
the
new.
Bob Marley legend.
I would definitely say yes, and I'd say, as someone who's a little questioning and a little skeptical of a lot of aspects of Rastafarianism for multiple reasons that I'm not going to get into, I find a lot of hypocrisies with it. Not that, all religions have hypocrisies, all religions have flaws. It's the nature of faith that you operate on faith, that you don't look at it, I guess, point blank, and you don't examine everything. There are things you close your eyes to. But the nature of Bob's faith and the nature of Bob's love for Jah and the nature of Bob's love for peace on earth and as a true calling, as a true warrior for love, I was really invigorated by this film, and my faith in Bob Marley as someone who just really who really understood himself, and someone who really was willing to die for what he believed in, really moved me and really touched me and had a profound effect on me even after the film was done. I was not expecting this at all. I was expecting to find basically more critical things about Bob Marley that I didn't know, and I ended up finding, and I will state this on the record, that this movie sort of led me to believe, and this is so cliched coming from a white person in their mid-20s, that Bob Marley, in his own way, in his own simple way, was a prophet of a certain caliber. And
Yeah, I think so. Certainly his songs are some of the most profound political songs of our time.
I agree.
In modern times. Films that Kevin McDonald did are How I Live Now. Well, that's in process right now, but the ones that people probably recognize: The Last King of Scotland,
Yep.
State of Play, Touching the Void, and The Eagle.
Which is recent.
But he's done quite a few different films. I guess Touching the Void is a documentary, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's
is a
done quite.
documentary, yeah.
One Day in September he did, which is a
that
documentary.
is a documentary, yes,
as well.
yes.
Actually, he's done quite a few documentaries.
Okay.
It looks to me like he's mostly.
For
a
some reason, I
documentary.
thought that this was the guy who directed Waterworld, and I was waiting for you to bring that up so we could have a good laugh about that. But that is Kevin J. Anderson, I believe. That's someone
okay.
else. But yeah, I looked at this guy's filmography a couple of weeks ago, and I just watched this movie sort of going into it blind the other day, and I actually wanted to read. I read no reviews about it because I wanted to go into it really with an open mind, and I wanted to explore it as deeply as possible. And then today was a little chaotic getting the show together.
Well, moving on, we both watched The Secret World of Arietti, and both of us. Speaking for myself, I have not watched a lot of these popular anime films before. For whatever reason, I just haven't gotten around to it. And so for me, this was one of my first endeavors into this type of anime storytelling, which it's not all about action, or a lot of anime tends to be sort of geared towards more like comic books, this type of action, superhero type of stuff. And so these stories are more geared towards maybe young children of all types, not just boys but girls. Probably appreciate them as much, and they're family films in general. They're like family films. It's based on the book The Borrowers, and it's, I think, a really beautiful film. Gabe, you were really impressed with the backgrounds, and I was too. I think the backgrounds are some of the best parts of the animation, in a sense, and the reason why, obviously, is because backgrounds don't move, so you can put a lot more time and effort into a beautiful background. because you're just panning a camera across it or having characters move through it. The story is also pretty cool. It's a pretty neat story, I think, as well. But should we play a clip and then talk about it a little bit more?
Yes.
Okay. Oops. Huh? Oh, we got to. This is very secret world of Arietti because I didn't turn up the volume. All right, here we go. We'll try that again.
What do they call you?
Just so you know.
Not that it's any of your business, but it's Arietti.
Arietti. Arietti. That's a beautiful name. Maybe we could be friends? Could you at least come out so I can see you? I want to make sure I'm not dreaming. I won't hurt you. I promise.
So anyway, that's a short clip, and actually, I mean, in a certain sense, you don't get much of what these films are is visual, and it's made in Japan, so actually it's probably more of a, I mean, the Japanese people didn't even make that soundtrack. They maybe made the background music, but they didn't make the foreground or the voices necessarily.
They recorded the ambient noise and the use of soundtrack, which what I got from it was very similar to the use of soundtrack and live recordings, field recordings used in The Fantastic Mr. Fox, which for me was a revolutionary piece of sound engineering for not only a feature film, but especially for an animated film. It's very simple and very tape boxy. Very, let's take a reel-to-reel recorder into the field and pass a mic around and use the rough recordings as they are, because that sounds more like real life than doing it all in a studio. I got that feeling from a lot of things in this film, both polished and unpolished. Mm-hmm. That there was a sense of real sound, of real rhythm, and of real noise.
Right.
There's like a stingy quality to some of the recordings of rain, of movement through grass and trees blowing the wind blowing, trees blowing the wind, and of footsteps, especially the perspective from the borrowers who in the story there's a small child, there's a young boy who gets moved to the country to live with his aunt because his parents are too busy to deal with him, and he's a product of divorce, and he's sick. He has a heart problem, and he starts finding clues that there is a family of little people, and I mean about 4 inches tall, who live in a little house underneath his home in a floorboard, and he doesn't make a big deal out of this as they would in an American film. He's just very matter-of-fact about it and very methodical and very lucid. I thought that was you. I was making sure I wasn't dreaming. It's very beautiful to see this sort of directness and this sort of lucid wonderment, this amazement, and the fact that he just wants friendship is what he's interested in. He's not interested in being scared or something.
The Japanese seem unafraid of. There doesn't seem to be as much of a need for young men to be macho or heroic. I mean, his heroism is in his decisions, in the decisions he makes, in the decision he makes, actually in his compassion. He's heroically compassionate in this film. And I think that that's kind of nice to see, and something that seems harder these days in America than it used to be almost, for boys not to have to be these tough kids or these, one day they're going to be like a cop or a fireman or something. He's more delicate, and I like that. Also, but then the father is extremely stoic. The father is kind of like, if he was a living actor, he would be someone like Robert Duvall, a type of Robert Duvall character, very stoic, doesn't a man of few words.
The father of the borrowers, of the small people.
Yeah, Ariette's father. Or is it her uncle?
It's her father.
Yeah. Yeah. Her father is a stoic sort of Robert Duvall-esque type of character.
Mm-hmm. I found the perspective from Ariette, who is the youngest borrower, who these people have to borrow items. That's why they're called the borrowers, because a little cube of sugar lasts them a couple months. But they have to venture out and be very careful because there used to be a thriving society of them underneath the floorboards, but many of them left, and many of them got lost, and many of them got killed by various means. So they're very living in sort of this cautious world of fear. Mm-hmm. The father, who's voiced by Will Arnett, who's very un-Will Arnett-y, very un-goofy and very direct and very matter of fact, and his voice suits the role very well. There's this there's a great sense of parenting in this movie that seemed a lot more real to me than in a lot of live action films, where yes, the mother's played a little bit over the top, but her concerns are pretty realistic, and the father's boredom and the way that he's sort of a boring person who has modest concerns and fears, and the way he deals with the politics of being a father, I found pretty humorous and actually pretty uneventful, which is sometimes how family life is, even amidst events outside of your control. There's just a weird fluency and a weird poetry to this movie that I was really, really touched by, and the music in this film really helps bring that out. It's very subtle and it's very intense at the same time.
There's something nice also about the reversal that normally in America, Americans generally watch American films, and the rest of the world generally watches American films. And so it's kind of nice when Americans are put in the position of watching a Japanese film or a film from another culture and absorbing that culture indirectly. And it's done in a way that's not overt. For example, if maybe I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people don't even realize that this is Japanese. The characters don't look specifically Japanese necessarily, except for maybe the maid once in a while. They have Western features because I believe that the Japanese sort of idealize Western features in a sense, but yet there's still something very Japanese about them. The automobiles are small and sort of Japanese style. The buildings, you see bamboo in the garden, things like that. But it's pretty subtle, and I feel like there's something very, what I referred to before about the young boy. The culture and also the house itself has certain Japanese qualities about it. And then in another way, though, the film is borrowed, no pun intended, from I believe it's a British novel, The Borrowers, or is it an American novel? Do you know?
I do not.
Okay, but anyway, it's an English language novel and our book series, and so it's funny because here we take this story and then it's made by the Japanese and then it's brought back to us in this form, and of course probably people in France or in Germany are watching it in their language, but anyway, I just wanted to make that point, that it's kind of nice to see not just American culture dominating the world scene in terms of what's considered interesting, but to have it go the other way. Another thing that I really like about this film is the kind of the things you were talking about, the beauty of the animation, and the way that it isn't using a great deal of CGI, but has old school qualities about it. And I was telling you yesterday, Gabe, that I thought at its worst, it looks a little bit like an old Speed Racer episode, but
Yes.
at its best, it's like seeing a book come to life, and I think that's beautiful. So anyway, I think it's a great film, and people should check it out. There was one thing that I wanted to bring up about the storyline, which was that I felt that it was the character of the maid was overly vilified. She was too much of a villain, and I found that was a little bit annoying to have this villain character just. She seemed to have no real motive for her anger, and also the mother character played by Amy Poulter was also, or Amy Poehler, how do you say her last name?
Poulter.
Was also kind of very shrill and hysterical, and I found that was unnecessary, and it seemed a little bit. It seemed I don't know why older women were so. They were the only two older women in the film, and they both had. Oh, except for the mother, of course. The mother of the boy showed up at a certain point. She was very evolved, and had a very beautiful perspective on life. But the two other women were just kind of extreme and hard to take. Did you feel that way too, Gabe, watching it?
Yes, I really felt that there was an unexplained anger and an animosity which came from the main character, and while it was necessary to have a villain and in terms of the problems in the story and to have an antagonist to bring about what the film ends up being about the courage and about standing up for what we really believe in, her motives and her reasoning and her reasons for being such a fearful character were never explained beyond just the fact that she was just a fearful character. It was never deepened. It was never explored. Mm-hmm. And even after she reached, there was no conclusion reached about her character. There was no final analysis, and there just was no greater depth to her villainy and to her and ultimately her redemption. There was no redemption. I just felt very, if there was one thing lacking to this film, it was her character, because she played such a central role in it, that to have it not deepened or expressed more fully, both in any sense of both character dimensions and in terms of plot mechanisms, it just felt very it just didn't feel genuine at all. Mm-hmm. And it was maybe the one hindrance I would say about this film, and because it's a main part of the film, it gets a little distracting. But besides that, this is just a Monet painting come to life. I
wouldn't choose Monet necessarily as the painter that I would refer to.
Okay.
But I agree that it was a very painterly film.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to be specific, but I don't think of Monet necessarily. I think of other artists, or I think of illustration art.
Sure.
But I don't think. Anyway, but the need to have this character be the villain, and this comes up as well in the next film that we talk about, and it comes up a lot generally in mainstream cinema, the need for a villain, for someone who is more cruel than any person you ever really encounter in real life. I always see it as a cop-out in cinema, and I don't quite understand. I mean, I do understand why people do it, because it's easier, but I don't understand why they don't they've taken care to do so many other things right. I don't quite understand why they don't go the extra mile to make the villains more interesting or more lifelike. And I think that part of that is part of it. Maybe it is partly an ideological thing where we seem to need villains in order to make ourselves feel better when we go to a movie. And if we make villains be complex and have a little bit of ourselves in them, then maybe people feel like they don't get relief from a movie, that they don't feel as though they go to a movie and they feel good about themselves. If you go to a movie and you see like, well, actually all people are a little bit bad and a little bit good, and that maybe I'm a little bit of a villain myself, or there isn't such a thing as just black and white, good and evil, then it makes it harder to get relief from the cinema. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of putting that out there as a thought of why that would be. So anyway, I don't know. I guess we kind of talked pretty at length about it. Actually, there was one thing, and this will transition over to The Dark Knight, which is, in terms of class, I think there's an interesting parallel here between The Secret World of Arietti and The Dark Knight. But maybe we'll go into The Dark Knight, and I'll elucidate further on my thoughts on that. So, we first of all, to just completely go off track with The Dark Knight. I mean, today, everybody in the world across the planet woke up to find out this horrible news event associated itself with this film. And I know Gabe doesn't think that there's any relevance between the things, but I think that there is something relevant. Why this event happened, why it happened in this culture, why this culture is basically the culture around a movie like The Dark Knight would attract an event such as the shooting that, you know, most people probably, we don't even really need to go into the details of, but this mass shooting that happened during the opening night of Dark Knight. And so that's an important thing that hangs over the story, you know, the reviewing of this film. It's hard to review a film when it has this overarching story, you know, real life story hanging over it. And also, I mean, maybe we can talk about that, but I don't want to get too in depth about it because we don't have a ton of time to talk about it. But what do you think, Gabe, as far as how we should proceed talking about The Dark Knight?
Talking about The Dark Knight. If you don't know what this film is about, I'd be very surprised. The trailers have been everywhere. The Dark Knight was one of the most viewed films in history, and this film, I perceive, will probably follow suit with it. Batman Begins was about Bruce Wayne coming up and becoming Batman and finding that he was betrayed by his mentor, who was actually the head of the League of Shadows, and discovering this whole world that he didn't realize was within himself, and this role that he needed to discover within himself. The Dark Knight, I'm sorry, Batman Begins. The Dark Knight was about salvation and about faith in the human character and the human condition, and also a lot about class and about identity and about who we are and the choices we make and the people we love, and also about the madman within us all is what I got out of The Dark Knight. It's a brilliant, bold, vicious, violent, and very naked, truthful film. An ugly film, but also one of the greatest action films ever made, and very hilarious, legendary, because the role killed Heath Ledger. It literally turned him into a drug addict and a psychopath and twisted him inside out to the point where, I mean, yes, he technically died of a drug overdose and possibly suicide, but this role killed him. It's a pretty amazing, legendary film.
Well, that's interesting, considering, you know, first you have that, and then you have this new historical event associated with all this new kind of like carnage associated with this film. And obviously all these things are coincidental in a way,
but legendary.
But they will, I mean, this will probably, most likely, this film will be remembered because
around
this event.
Absolutely.
And the French in France, they actually just did not release the film because of this. They actually didn't put it out. The theaters didn't.
The premiere. They canceled.
They didn't. They canceled the premiere.
They canceled the big Hollywood-style glitzy premiere.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe because they were afraid that there was that it would be copycat, or that this wasn't just an isolated incident or something like that.
Possibly, and I think just out of respect too, or something.
Yeah, maybe.
And
I think that says something about the French as well, that they have a certain kind of sensitivity to things, or the idea of cinema,
or they're scared.
Well, I mean, but no, I mean, New York didn't, you know, I mean, it didn't, people didn't do it in other countries.
Security is beefed up. Security is beefed up
all over the planet, and yet the French are the ones that stopped it. And maybe it has something to do with the government having more power to sort of implement these things, whereas in America, we live in a much more business-driven world, and so it's like, well, we got to continue business here. Whereas in France, maybe they're like, well, business needs to stop for a second. You know,
in honor of what's actually important. Wow. That's a really good point. So
And
the film,
speaking of business, I'm just going to, one little order of business before we get into the Dark Knight a little deeper. I just wanted to point out that I was really mad sitting in the theater. First of all, we went there. We went first to one. We went to the Southgate Cinema, and we couldn't get in, right, because it was sold out, which has never happened. I've never had this experience before, where you go to a movie and it's sold out, except at film festivals. Then we went to the other one, and we had to get in line almost an hour before 45 minutes before the film. We were in line with all these people. And then we get in the theater, and we watched probably 40 minutes, or it seemed like 30, 40 minutes straight of ads and ads, watching ads. We saw two different insurance ads, two different Progressive Insurance and American Family Insurance.
And this is
within
common, so,
one
yeah.
movie theater waiting for a movie. We watched so many ads, and I was just feeling outraged because, hey, we're paying good money to watch these movies, and I don't understand why Marcus Cinema or whatever cinema out there is. I mean, I know that the Oriental does it too, but I don't understand what's happening. I suppose movie theaters are making less money, and they need to sell ads to make up for the losses. But at the same time, there's something that's being lost because of the need to just project all these ads. But I guess it is one of those things. It's like, well, how can I be angry at the fact that these cinemas need to make money? And so that's probably that's the only reason that they wouldn't be able to do it if they didn't put up ads. But I do think it's irritating to see that, because it wasn't that way in the past. You know, we all know historically that you would just watch previews before a movie. You would never watch ads in America, and now it's become part of our culture. And I just want to remind people to be aware of that. So when they watch a movie. Okay, sorry I went so long on that. All right, let's talk about The Dark Knight. Should we play this clip that I have lined up real quick?
Sure.
Okay, and this is a clip from Selena's interrogation.
Some mistakes, Miss Kyle.
Girls gotta eat.
And you have an appetite. Why would you run? You can't hide from us with a record like this.
Maybe it's not you I'm running from.
Who then? Bay? What do you know about him?
That you should be as afraid of him as I am.
We can offer you protection. Okay. When I spotted you, I was looking for a friend of mine, Bruce Wayne. Did they kill him?
I'm not sure.
So this is, I would say this is kind of a good illustration of what bothered you the most about this film, or one of the things that bothered you, Gabe, about this film, which was that it's a lot of talk comparatively to a lot of action films. Would you say that?
I wouldn't say that it's a lot of talk. I like heady action films. I love action films that are psychologically tense, astute, and taut, and full of ideas, and of taking the viewer on places without having to physically go there sometimes. I love action films that are very brainy and brawny. My favorite action film will always be Predator, to the day I die, most likely, unless somehow they make a better one, which I don't see happening. That's a great film that balances action, violence, brawn, muscles, steroids, one-liners, great writing, violence, and art.
And I would say that Prometheus, just in terms of recent films, kind of falls in along those lines a little bit.
Very, 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 very similar. Aliens being also one of my all-time favorite action films that balances the same elements, that balances a lot of humanity, but with a lot of action. This film is a film that is riding on the shoulder of giants, of a giant, great masterpiece, The Dark Knight. So to finish a series with something like The Dark Knight looming over it, and to wrap it all up, and to have a twist, and to have the character struggle with something, but to rise up again through the ashes and find himself and come back and defeat something, but also have it be, because it's Nolan, be a telling film about our time, about the times we live in, the culture we live in, and possibly, feel sort of prophetic about what he's talking about, or that he's enlightening the culture to ideas that the whole culture might not be aware of. To simplify it, enough that an 8-year-old can basically understand what they're watching, but also make it engaging and interesting enough for an 80-year-old. I just felt this film couldn't decide whether it was really stupid or really, really, really intelligent. It thought it was really intelligent through most of it, and there just wasn't really anything to justify that to me. I didn't feel that I was watching a really smart... I mean, some of it, yes, is well acted. It's well written. But I'm just sitting there bored senseless through so much of this movie, waiting to be captivated to like the point where I can like breathlessly wait for what the characters are going to do next. I knew what most of the characters were going to do next, and I didn't care when they did it. The action sequences were quick and undramatic, and they didn't disturb me, and they didn't pull me in. I didn't want more. I didn't care. It was an overlong movie with a lot of... Christopher Nolan has developed this style since Inception. Inception in this of action happening where he shoots things in this gray, muted sort of blue palette where things happen, people get beat up, people get killed. People are just getting killed constantly, but it's of no consequence because the people who are of the sudden immediate danger within like 10 seconds they're introduced, and all of a sudden they're killed. It's of no importance whether they live or die. Even the good guys, it's never of any importance because you never get drawn into them enough.
Yeah.
It just feels like a lot of violence without any consequence, and that bores the living crap out of me.
Well, I think that there's for me, I mean, I would have said that exactly what you're saying about the Avengers. I felt that way absolutely. It was just empty there's some interesting things about the Robert Downey Jr.'s character. But besides for that, a lot of the characters to me were... the Avengers was just a lot more cartoon-like. But this film, I thought... I was definitely irritated about a lot of things, but I didn't think it was nearly as bad as what you're describing.
I wouldn't say it's bad. I don't want to give the wrong impression. This is a 3-star film, and I would recommend this to pretty much anyone because I'm pretty sure that almost anyone is going to enjoy this movie. Anyone that enjoyed The Dark Knight, I'm pretty sure is going to like this. This is me. I just didn't care for it myself, but I would still recommend it. Personally, for myself and my enjoyment level, I'd give this film 2 out of 4, maybe 1.5 out of 4. But I'd say this is definitely a 3 or a 3.5 star movie. It's just that my love of The Dark Knight, my absolute adornment of everything about that film is so high that this film could, and I was explaining this to my friend the other day, I'm like, this film can only be a disappointment to me, but of course I'm going to see it on opening day.
Right.
So I'm really glad that I saw it, and there's a lot of intelligence, and there is a lot of impressive features about this movie. There is a standardness to the like just this look of the film is very hard to create. It takes a lot of effort to create like a standard mold of the way that Nolan sees the world.
Yeah.
And the way he pictures our moods sort of come to life, both as metaphors and both as like literally the world, the filthy world we live in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of commentary on class and money and struggle in this movie, and that's very, I mean, for a film that's of the caliber that this is, I mean of the audience that it's trying to reach, which is basically going to try to take over the world, and of the fact that it could literally be a lazy, stupid movie, but it chooses to challenge itself and be a very multi-layered, multi-tiered, multi-storylined film with a lot of political side notes in it is not something that's necessary. And the fact that they chose to do that, to challenge themselves, says a lot. So I guess I don't know what the hell's wrong with me.
Well, you were asking me in the car why I liked the film or what I liked about the film. And I said that it was kind of hard for me to think of what it was that made it enjoyable for me. There's a lot of good reasons. It was very, very well made, very well scripted, I believe. The storyline was carefully created and written. And in addition to that, I think it was kind of cool to be part of this thing, this moment, where we had to stand in line with all these people who were all excited to see this thing, and knowing that was happening all over the world, made it kind of gave it an extra kind of excitement to it, or gave it an extra sort of intrigue.
Sometimes the
for
crowd
me.
mentality is really cool. I have to admit, sometimes I get really into being part of the audience, a packed audience. I
or
love
being
it.
part
I
of
love it.
a being part of a crowd around something is where you don't necessarily even have to like it yourself that much, but you just are enjoying other people's enjoyment of the thing.
There's a momentum. I agree.
And to be honest, I don't think I got that from, once we watched the film, I didn't get a sense that the audience had a, anything other than an average kind of movie viewing experience. Some of the things that I wrote notes throughout the film, and I just want to kind of touch on some of the things that that struck me, and so maybe I'll just kind of bounce across them. I was the film opened, and I didn't even realize that the film was going. I knew that there was a pause, and that we had kind of like, they'd run the name of the production house. What was it? MGM or something? I don't even remember.
It's Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers, the logo went, and so that gave you a sense that, okay, we're watching the movie. But the way that the editing was done at the beginning was rushed, and it felt to me like previews. I couldn't tell. I was almost going to ask you, are we still watching a preview at this point? Because I knew, it's not that I didn't know we were watching the movie, but I felt, that was a feeling I had. It was that it felt like a preview. It didn't feel like a film. But for some reason, it resolved itself after the first 10 minutes. And then it kind of paced itself properly. But the pace somehow started out unusual. There were references, I felt, a lot to the politics these days, political things you see with the hoods over prisoners' heads. The kind of gear that the cops would wear, and the gear that the military people would wear, is all reminiscent of our culture right now, and all of the kind of the way that people gear up nowadays for military things, and that. There's a certain part of it that I feel feels like glorification of it, or it kind of gets us used to it, used to seeing people with hoods over their heads, and to see it in films, I feel like it's something that shouldn't be tread upon lightly, because it's so serious. And so when I see it in narrative filmmaking, especially something like Batman, which isn't, obviously it's a cartoon. I just don't like the idea of correlating cartoons with reality, with the real violence of war and so on. Well, yeah, okay, cartoon, comic is what I mean. You're right. Good. Thanks for correcting me on that. I would say the main thing that I really want to address, though, is the depiction of the bad guys. They were basically Bolsheviks, who were somewhere between Bolsheviks and Taliban. And they were living in some hole in Gotham City, which doesn't make any sense. Made no sense whatsoever.
And they're employing children in the sewer.
It's just bizarre.
Everything just coming together.
It didn't even look like New York. It looked like Afghanistan.
Gotham.
Like they were
it's supposed to be Gotham.
Yeah, but Gotham is New York. It's just it is New York. It's the subway system. We all know that it's New York. But it felt like Afghanistan. This is where the bad people are, their lair, so to speak. But it's their prison. It's where they came from. It's such a strange metaphor. I don't even know what they're trying to say. Are they trying to say that the 99%, because it becomes clear that the bad guys are the 99%.
Yeah. And
we know that Bruce Wayne is a billionaire. And so it seems like clearly the story that they're telling is that the 99% are these like the Taliban. They're like terrorists, or they're like Bolsheviks from Russia. Everyone's Russian. Everyone's got these Russian accents, or they've got sort of Middle Eastern or accents from Bulgaria or something like that. It's all white people, so that might have been a racial decision, like, well, we don't want to seem racist, so we'll do it all with white people, but we're going to choose kind of a Russian white person to be our enemy in the film. And they're the enemy against the billionaire, Bruce Wayne. So it's kind of strange. I find that to be disturbing, to say, if nothing else, that's the premise. And then of course, the cops are always good guys in mainstream films, but the cops are victims in this film. They're
super good.
They're
guys.
victims. Yeah, they're extremely good guys. They're these superheroes, and the supervillains are the people, are the 99% who occupy Wall Street. I mean, am I going too far in saying that?
I would say that it's treading on similar territory to where The Dark Knight was, that there's a psychopath within us all, and that there's maybe a communist within us all, as I think where they're kind of going.
But the problem is that the communist, the depiction is this Bolshevik, is this completely...
Once Gotham is broken down, and I don't want to give away too much, but it basically resorts Gotham to being a class war and a communist society.
Right.
So I think, and then what it does is it ends up bringing out the worst in a lot of people, that sort of the rich are run down and taken it and just run astray. But it doesn't ever go anywhere because the logic and the reality of what would really happen if that had happened, and how terrible and how atrocious it literally would be, is never explored. It's never shown. It's just like everything's done for everything's done sort of for plot conventions and out of like everything just comes together too quickly, too closely. The characters are always in the convenient place at the convenient time, not only for what their agenda is, but for the mechanics of the plot of the film. Everyone's ubiquitous, and everyone can get around from one end of the city to the other very quickly. It just is. I know it's a fantastical movie. It's a superhero movie, but for a movie so rooted in who we are and meant to be so close to examining real life and the problems of real life and the situations of real life and the decisions that we make as people and as individuals, it just doesn't feel real or plausible at all.
Yep.
In the scenes where it's supposed to.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and we'll get cut off. We've already been cut off in some of our archival stuff. But thanks for checking in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Sorry about the quick ending.
Goodbye.